The last day of the Pacers preseason, and today the roster battles will get sorted out. Who's got the leg up for the Pacers' last roster spot? Who's in contention? What else could happen for this team to settle as the regular season begins next week? Plus, Houston Rockets here in Indiana for a game. Let's preview that action tonight. All coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, the final day of the Pacers preseason. Rockets in town tonight. Two young ascending teams squaring off for their final preseason tune-ups, with the regular season starting for the NBA next Tuesday. We're almost there. NBA fans, Pacers fans, we're almost there. Pacers Wizards next Wednesday as the Pacers open up their regular season. So lots to talk about today because the roster deadline's coming up. Pacers got to get their team down to the standard regular season size. Who could get cut? Who's in the mix? What are the next steps for the Pacers to finalize? And they're in a unique spot with the salary floor to even have more going on the next couple days than other teams in the league. So what's going to go on there? And then we'll, of course, talk Pacers Rockets, right? What's important to watch in that game? Who's important to watch in that game? What's going to be fun to take care of for the Pacers as they tune up for the regular season one final time? But I think the lead story as we head into, again, this final game is the roster battle at play here for the Pacers, right? So here's the situation at play. The regular season cap economics, the math starts counting, players start counting towards regular season salary next Monday, the day before the regular season starts. So you have to have your roster down to the correct sizes by that date, which for every NBA team is 15 guys at most on standard deals and two-way contracts at most at that time. Now, that's also when, if you're on a non-guaranteed deal, your money starts counting. And so it sounds like you have to waive guys by Monday. But remember, NBA waivers take 48 hours to clear. So what's really going to happen is every player who will be cut and not making a final team will get waived either on or before Saturday. So they have 48 hours to be off the team by that timing before the season starts. So expect to start seeing a lot of these maneuvers from teams as preseason is finalized and stuff happens, right? The Pacers were just benefits of this timing, as the Sixers, who need to get their roster down to 15 guys, they had 3 too many. The first guy they waived was Trevelin Queen, who got hurt for them in the preseason. He had that head injury, so he got waived. He got some guaranteed money from Philly and gets a two-way with the Pacers, right? They scoop him up the second he clears waivers. On Tuesday, he is now on their team, right? So that is stuff that's going to happen. The Sixers just waived 2 more players. A bunch of teams are waiving and signing Exhibit 10 guys because that deadline is coming up. Today's the last day for those players and teams to finalize all of those details. So finagling is coming for every team, including the Pacers, who have to get their roster down to the right size, right? And that's the important thing for them, because financially, the Pacers are totally fine, right? They're well below the cap. They're well below the salary floor. They don't have any concerns about how much they're spending, how it will impact anything they want to do in the middle of the season. No flexibility concerns for them. For them, it's just about getting the roster down to the legal amounts for the regular season, right? So they signed Queen on Tuesday, and that brought them to 19 contracts heading into this season. They have 17 guys on NBA deals. That's the 13 guaranteed contracts they have, as well as 3 non-guaranteed guys and O'Shea Brissett, who's non-guaranteed, but in my head is effectively guaranteed because it makes no sense for the Pacers to cut him unless he tears his ACL in the next 24 hours, right? So 17 contracts, the 13 guaranteed guys, O'Shea Brissett, and then the 3 guys who I would consider the competition, air quotes right now, which is James Johnson, Langston Galloway, and Davy Das Servitas. And Servitas was two-way eligible. He is two-way eligible still, and his deal is technically allowed to be converted to a two-way contract, but the Pacers just filled that with Trevelin Queen. They wouldn't have done that so close to the deadline unless they were really confident they were going to keep him. Obviously, they're not going to cut Kendall Brown. So I really doubt this is on the table. It's technically possible they could cut Johnson and Galloway and then give Kendall Brown a standard deal and then give a two-way to Servidus, but that doesn't make much sense either in terms of developing players and having them on the roster long-term. So theoretically, thinking about the Pacers who have 19 guys now, which is 17 contracts and two-ways, they really have to get that 17 contracts number down to 15, which means they have to cut two guys either Friday or Saturday to get their roster all prepped for the regular season. And that comes down to James Johnson, Langston Galloway, and David Servidus to me. Now, we'll talk later in this segment and into the second segment about what else it could technically be. But that is essentially what this comes down to me. Now, if you'll go way back in time, a couple guys on the Summer League team were reported by other outlets to be getting Exhibit 10 deals, which is camp deals that can become G League deals. That is Eli Brooks, Tevin Brown, Jermaine Samuels, Fanbo Zhang. None of them have signed with the Pacers yet. It's very possible that that was either misreported or no longer the case as this offseason has developed. But it's also possible what you see is the second Pacers-Rockets ends on Friday, the Pacers cut two guys and then sign two of those four names. And then on Saturday, waive those two, sign two more, and then waive those two in the same transaction. So you could see a lot happen for the Pacers to finalize their team in terms of cuts and signings. But a lot of that is procedural, assuming the reporting on those four players was correct, right? So expect to hear more names than just the three I said who are competing and on the team right now in Galloway, Servidus, and Johnson. But those are the three, really, given what we've seen so far and how the Pacers have operated and how they've kind of brought those guys in for competition. Those are the three that I think you'll see. So you might see, and what I will guess will happen, I believe this is what happened last year too, is perhaps the Pacers waive guys before the preseason game Friday, but that doesn't make a ton of sense. I guess it's not a big deal, but that doesn't make the most sense. If you're going to cut guys Friday, just do it the second the game is over. So you have the most information possible and then do the rest of the dance you want to do to get your team sorted. So actually talk about the roster battle because I've sort of danced around it and explained the situation for far too long. There's more to this than just, the mechanics of it. And I feel bad that it took me almost 5 minutes to get through all that, but there are three guys in the mix, right? James Johnson is, in my head, the leader. So we'll talk to him first. The reason I think the two guys with an advantage are James Johnson and Langston Galloway over Servidus is they're veterans. And that is something Rick Carlisle has talked about a lot in camp being important to a younger team. And that totally makes sense to me, right? And I want to take you back in time to kind of show you another example where the Pacers front office leaned on a veteran for a team that they thought would be maybe not quite as good. And the 2017-18 Pacers, right? They just had traded PG for Vic and Domas, and that team wasn't a young team, right? Vic was 25, I think, that year, and they signed Collison and Bogdanovich. Turner was still young, Sabonis was young, Vic was pretty young, but they had, Thad Young in the mix, Corey Joseph, they Lance even. They had vets on that team around young guys, Glenn Robinson, another young guy on that team. TJ Leaf was a rookie that year. So they had youth. They were clearly like building or transitioning because they signed a bunch of 1 and 2 year deals. But that team in general was younger than the Pacers typically on their growth path. All that to say, if you'll recall who the 15th guy to come out of camp was for that team, it was Damien Wilkins. Damien Wilkins, a vet who hadn't even been in the NBA for the last 3 seasons. And he had a lot of value on that team, right? He was a vet that made it all the way to the cutdown deadline, even started a game for the Pacers when there were some injuries. And so that was pre-Rick Carlisle, which I use as an anecdote to say it's not just a Carlisle saying, I like vets thing. Clearly this front office says there's some value on having veterans with experience on teams and like older veterans, not like TJ McConnell is a great veteran. I don't want to discount the veterans the Pacers currently have, but a guy like James Johnson, Langston Galloway has been on finals teams. James Johnson has been on conference finals teams and has played on a billion franchises, right? That has value both, I think, to Carlisle and the front office in a way that Servidus doesn't, right? And Servidus has done fine in the preseason. He's made his threes. His defense has looked okay. But as you sort of sort through what the Pacers would be looking for to finalize their roster, I think they would lean vets over youth. Now, if they're leaning youth over vets, Servidus would have the advantage, right? And he's played fine and done what, at least if you listen to, his short interview that was aired on this podcast a few days ago, he's done what's been asked of him. So if they're leaning youth and he's a wing, top 40 pick 3 years ago, it makes a lot of sense to keep him in that way. But I think for him, getting that $50,000 bonus and working his way through the G League, a la the Justin Anderson path, a la the Terry Taylor path, for example, may make more sense for him if he can play well with the Mad Ants. Because I think, and maybe even I do agree with, veterans making a little more sense here. So I think James Johnson and Galloway have the advantage over Servetus. Now, here's where I separate those two players in my head, because both have value, right? In fact, let's make the argument for both, right? I think that point guard depth is important and helpful, and that's where Langston Galloway gets some points. And the Pacers learned that the hard way last year, right? It didn't feel like they would need these guys, but Brad Wanamaker was their depth point guard, and so was Dwayne Washington, and Wanamaker wasn't cutting it, so they brought in Kiefer Sykes, and he wasn't cutting it, so they tried Dwayne Washington permanently there, and then they had Lance, and the Pacers ended up stinking for a variety of reasons last year, but for a while, the fact that they were playing 20 minutes of bad point guard play basically every game was a factor in those struggles, right? So those guys' struggles really hurt the Pacers. And Rick Carlisle likes having experience at that spot. Galloway has experience. He's been on good teams. I chatted with him yesterday for a while. Like, he'd be a good fit because of that. However, forwards are also important, and the Pacers don't have very many of them, right? Their current starting four is a center. Other guys who have played four for them are either Terry Taylor, who's naturally who knows what position, and Brissett, and then the other forwards they've played are two-way guys. Kendall Brown's been in that mix. They don't have a lot of forward depth, and James Johnson is a forward. They don't have a lot of those guys. So I think if I were making the decision, I would put more emphasis on the forward spot. James Johnson, remember, was not in the rotation, but was also a reserve 5. He played the 5 for them against the Hornets in their first preseason game. And he was clearly ahead of Galloway and Servetus in the rotation that night. Then in the next game, he didn't play. He hasn't played against the Knicks at all. But I think just the evidence we have and the Pacers roster scenario now, you could in theory play James Johnson at the 3 he did earlier in his career. I think he would have the advantage. So going into this Rockets game, I think the ranking would be James Johnson first, Langston Galloway second, David Servetus third. But it's possible the team views it differently. They value that guard depth. They just got another forward in Tevin Brown. Tevin Brown, my goodness. Trevelin Queen. I'm reading names that are in front of my face, and there's too many. So this could go a number of ways, but I would imagine James Johnson gets spot 15, but it could go to any of those guys. I think there's a case for all of them. I don't think there's a wrong choice, but I do think there's a best choice, if that makes sense. But don't get me too far ahead here, because is there a case for more than one of them to make it? I mean, I wouldn't think so, but I have to discuss it because it's not just totally fait accompli all the time that this will be how it goes. Before we talk about the rest of the roster decisions ahead for the Pacers, though, I got to talk to you guys about betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and the #1 source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find all over at BetOnline. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information, the live betting, and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. They've got lines up for football this weekend. The Colts, who Lord knows what's going to happen in their games these days, favored by 2 at home against Jacksonville, who beat them earlier this season. Colts, you never know what Colts are going to show up any week, but those lines and more all over at betonline.net. Head over to that website today or use your mobile device to learn more about BetOnline, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Rockets. Jackson Gatlin kills it covering that team. Pacers play them tonight. Hear what's going on with them. And Tari Eason, the leading scorer amongst rookies in the preseason. Yes, we'll be talking about him in the third segment today. Let's wrap up looking at the roster battle ahead and what the Pacers could be thinking heading into this, because it seems like, looking at the numbers, looking at the finances, that this is a 3-man race for one spot, right? Galloway, Johnson, Servetus fighting for the last roster spot. Could it be different, though? I mean, maybe. O'Shea Brissett's a non-guaranteed deal. They should not cut him for any of these guys. But if they wanted to keep 2 of them, could anything change? Could they cut a 2-way guy to keep Servetus somehow? Yeah, these are all possibilities, right? There's a lot the Pacers could still do if they want to keep like Galloway and Johnson. They could decide, you know what, we'd prefer to have this veteran James Johnson over maybe Goga Batadze at the 5. I think that would be extremely foolish, but it's something they could, in theory, consider if they want veterans on this team. They could decide to make a small trade if they can find a home for, a guy who's been talked about a lot as makes no sense on this team, Daniel Theis, who is a veteran himself, was in the finals last year. Again, I don't think they should be rushing to do any of this stuff, but these are just things that have been discussed, right? If somehow a trade materializes for Daniel Theis in the next 2 days, because I bet there's at least one NBA trade in the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe two. The Pistons still have to figure out what's going on with Kemba Walker. Rudy Gay and the Jazz. The Jazz still have to figure out how they're going to cut guys. The Thunder are always ripe for a trade if money and picks are available, right? I bet there's one, maybe two. And so I don't know if the Pacers would be involved, but if they find a home for Theis for some reason, they end up with another spot. Maybe more than one of these guys could make it. But I would say if no trade materializes, it doesn't make sense for more than one of them to make it. What makes the most sense is the Pacers decide which one of those three guys, Servidis, Johnson, and Galloway, has the most value to their team, and they just cut the other two. And as heartbreaking as that can be, that's probably what's best for their team long term. But if they really decide they need two of those guys, or someone gets badly hurt, on Friday, then they'll have to maybe make some other decisions or make moves elsewhere to put the pieces together, right? Servidis can be converted to a two-way, but that would involve them figuring out what to do with Trevelyan Queen or Kendall Brown to open up a two-way slot. They shouldn't just cut either of those guys. But these are decisions the Pacers have to make and what faces them in the next 24 hours. I think it's mostly settled, but if there was a case for two of those guys to make it, let's say there's an injury or one of them has an amazing game tomorrow or something like that, there's a lot that would have to happen instead. But I think the Theis trade or a Batadze waiver would be the two things that would make the most sense if the Pacers wanted to dance around that and open up another roster spot. But I supremely doubt it, right? It seems like the most likely scenario is just one of those guys end up making it, and it ends up being 15 contracts and two ways. Now, there is another option that I haven't even laid out there. That's that none of them make it. And that is also not ridiculous. And I'll explain why, right? Trevelyan Queen just got cut by Philly for just as an example thing. And the Pacers scooped him up. They were benefits of a team's roster crunch. And that's the most obvious and direct way. One team cuts a guy, the Pacers pick him up. But looking at another example, Ty Jerome, a recent first-round pick, got cut from his old home. Got traded away from his old home in OKC and then got cut somewhere else. Now he's on the Warriors, and the Warriors just opened up a two-way slot that maybe he can occupy, right? Teams are looking for these cuts that make more sense on a different home. If the Pacers see another team make a cut of a player that they think, hey, this makes more sense for us, perhaps they could waive all three. Waive James Johnson, Langston Galloway, and Davidas Servidis, and then scoop up that player, either claiming them on waivers or signing them outright when they clear waivers. And there's a million teams that will have to make cuts in the next couple days, right? The Warriors just waived both of their two-way players earlier today. Like those are two-way guys. They're not just, Exhibit 10 G League rights guys. Those are two-way players. It's possible that the Pacers waive all three in an attempt to scoop up someone else that they maybe want with their last spot. It would require a team waiving someone that they want, but that is also something in the mix to consider. So if you see all three get waived, or if you see just something surprising with those names, consider that either someone else on another team got waived that they like, or they're bringing in someone else, or option three, there's so much to this. And I feel like I'm kind of talking in circles, but I already said this name, so I'll just use him as an example, but I'll talk about a couple of guys like this. Kemba Walker in Detroit, right? Detroit, it's been reported by James Edwards very well in The Athletic. He's not going to play for their team, and they've discussed a buyout, but they're over the roster limit, right? They're going to have to get down to it somehow, and the easiest way is cut or trade or buyout or whatever Kemba Walker. And since they're over the cap, right, would they be willing to trade, a crappy second rounder in Kemba Walker to get a trade exception, and then the Pacers get a second rounder and they just cut Kemba themselves? That kind of thing is possible, but it's only possible with roster spots. And technically the Pacers right now have roster spots. They only have 19 out of 20, but that, they could do that even after making cuts if they cut all three guys into the roster deadline next Monday. So if they waive all three, that kind of stuff opens up, right? Rudy Gay, for example, with Utah, who might also be over. I mean, that's a small trade exception for Utah, but it's better than not having a trade exception and eating the money or eating a buyout, for example. You could name a number of these guys. I thought Mo Harkless would be in this group, but the Rockets just cut him. They're going to eat that money. It sounds like there's a lot of teams whose finances would make this make sense. I think the Thunder will probably have to waive a guaranteed contract to some extent, although they might have gotten away with it after their crazy trade with the Rockets they made a couple weeks ago. But there will be teams that have to figure out how they're going to dance around guaranteed contracts. The two most obvious ones to me are Kemba Walker and Rudy Gay, but perhaps there are more that I'm missing or that teams will run into as, their preseason develops. So I think the most likely scenario still is, after Friday's game, you see 2 Pacers cut. And my guess right now would be Langston Galloway and David Servidis, but maybe the Pacers cut all 3 of those guys on the fringe of their roster, or maybe they only cut 1 and they do something else surprising. There's a lot on the table for them. And the thing is, I don't think anything that happens Friday would really change it, but it's possible. We'll talk about that in the third segment. But, we didn't even see any of those 3 play on Wednesday against the Knicks, right? They all 3 did not play. Rick Carlisle played more of a standard rotation until about 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And then the closing group was Nembhard, Matheran, Goga, O'Shea Brissett, and Kendall Brown, which is like all those guys are clearly in the Pacers ecosystem and don't seem like cuts. So it seems like those guys might not play unless the Pacers taper back because the regular season's only 5 days away. But who knows? They have a lot of decisions they can make. I think the most likely thing you'll see in the next 2 days or so, depending on when you're listening, is James Johnson walks away with the Pacers' 15th roster spot. But because they have no bad options and because there could be trade options available to the Pacers because they have all this cap space and could help out another team if they get an asset for it, don't be surprised to see something else sort of major happen. And whatever does happen, hey, guess what? We'll be right here on Monday to break it all down. Who is the Pacers' final roster plus season previews for their last 2 guys who make it. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but season preview for Trevel and Queen and whoever their last roster spot guy is needs to happen. So stay tuned for that. Hey, the Pacers play their final preseason game tonight. Can't wait to see Pacers Rockets. Love being in Gainbridge as the preseason winds down. What is there to watch for in that game? The 2 top scoring rookies going head to head is certainly high on that list. So let's talk about Pacers Rockets, what to watch for, what the takeaways can be. Before we do that, though, I got to talk to you guys about Acre Pro. When it comes to land sales, it pays to have experts in your corner, and Acre Pro Midwest Farm Group are your local farmland specialists. With decades of experience in Indiana agriculture, no one knows the market better. Whether you're doing a 1031 exchange, expanding your operation, or selling a row crop farm, your local Acre Pro agent will walk the land with you and ensure that a deal is done right. Great service is just the beginning with Acre Pro. They provide unparalleled land data, including soil ratings, elevation, flood zones, and land valuation across parcels, so you can get the full picture up front and be confident in the entire land market. Your agent will cater to each of your individual needs and help you navigate the complexities of buying and selling land, so the process is made simple. Experience the ease of Acre Pro by working with farmland specialists like Kyle Rule, Brady Hammond, Neil Hur, and Kyle Spray. Visit acrepro.com or call 765-587-3185. Talk to your local land expert today. Again, acrepro.com or call 765-587-3185. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Warriors. Hear more from Cyrus Ataz about Draymond Green returning to practice. Sounds like he's going to play in the Warriors regular season opener. That's been a crazy saga since he punched a teammate. Cyrus will break that all down for you at Locked On Warriors. Let's keep diving into the Pacers preseason. Their final game, Pacers Rockets, tonight in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Can't wait to see this because Pacers played the Hornets in the first game. I thought that one would be a little different than it ended up, but the Hornets weren't really trying. But the Rockets could be the most dynamic team on offense that the Pacers play throughout this preseason. Jalen Green is a beast. That dude can score from basically anywhere on the floor. He's added a little bit of mid-range this preseason. Kevin Porter scoring well. Jabari Smith only played in one preseason game, their first one. Will he be back? He's interesting. Alperen Şengün is starting now. He's so crafty with the ball. The Rockets are super fun, and I hope we get to see Jabari Smith, although I sort of doubt it. But still, with all the young guys they have and the interesting mix of players they have, and oh, by the way, the leading rookie scorer in the preseason, Tari Eason, the Rockets are a joy to watch. And they will be a fun test for the Pacers in a way that I thought the Hornets would be to open the preseason. LaMelo Ball did play then. He's now hurt. But they did not put the effort in. The Hornets did not look very good in that game. Either way, this game should be fun. And that's sort of my top of the thing to watch here is the Rockets are younger. Last year, if you'll recall, the Pacers beat the Rockets pretty handily because the Rockets' interior defense was not very good. They had Daniel Tice at that time, I believe, for the first time these two teams played. And in general, no matter what big was out there for Houston, Christian Wood, Daniel Tice, Alperen Şengün, they kind of struggled on the interior. And they might improve a little this year. They have better defenders in the mix now with Jabari Smith, and not having Christian Wood is addition by subtraction. The front court, Bruno Fernando is an underrated defender. But in general, they are still a younger team with a lot of kinks on defense in the same way the Pacers are, right? That's what I talked about after the Knicks game. Young teams are going to be inconsistent on defense because it only takes one guy messing up to mess up a young team's defense because they don't rotate as well. They're not as connected. So can the Pacers take advantage of that? They did a pretty good job against a younger, not young, Charlotte's a little older, but a younger Charlotte team. They did a very good job taking advantage of that, scored over 120 points, still their highest scoring game of the preseason because they were able to get good looks against that Hornets team. Can the Pacers do that against the Rockets tonight? I think that will be telling for a lot of their season perspectives. You know, the Pacers have talked about this publicly, right? KP has said it, Rick has said it. They think they're going to be fun this year and win a lot of games because they'll score a lot because they think they have these athletic players who can also shoot. And that sort of style of a young team is fun to watch. It can also lead to a lot of volatility where some nights you'll shoot really well and be flying all over the court and win by a bunch. And some nights it will not go your way. But against a team like the Rockets, who's also young and also going to have a lot of games like that, there could be fireworks in this game. But in general, from a Pacers perspective and takeaway perspective, against a team that projects to be one of maybe the bottom 10 defensive teams this year, maybe a little bit better than that. But in general, against this Rockets team, can the Pacers take advantage, score a bunch of points, dominate some matchups, find easy buckets, right? Even Miles Turner had a nice game on the interior against Houston last year. Can all that stuff happen again? And can Halliburton and company take advantage of a weaker perimeter defensive team? That's thing number one I'll be watching. Sort of similar to a key thing to watch against Charlotte, and the Pacers did a pretty good job in that game of doing that. Number two, and maybe the most fun thing to watch in this game, Benedict Matheran, of course, by himself, I could just say, is a thing to watch in this game. But specifically in this one, Benedict Matheran versus Tari Eason. I don't know if they'll ever guard each other necessarily, but Tari Eason, the only rookie in the NBA who's averaging more points per game this preseason than Benedict Matheran at 20.7. He's shooting 64% from the field, 44% from deep, 10 rebounds a game, 2 steals. Oh, man, Tari Eason looks awesome. And what he's doing really well is something Benedict Matheran's also done well. A lot of kind of poacher-style points where he ends up around the ball because he's really good at finding cracks in the defense, right? Benedict Matheran's done well at that, getting some nice offensive rebounds, just being around the play. Tari Eason's done well at that as well. I'll be fascinated to see those guys go against each other. And it doesn't matter. It might not even become the case. So another rookie could go off in the next day or so, but this could be for the preseason rookie scoring crown. And I will, of course, have fun watching that and seeing them go against each other. It's always fun to see rookies battle, but as the top scoring rookies, how do they play against each other? That will be fun. Eason's been phenomenal. Of course, if you're listening to this, you know Matheran's been phenomenal. But hey, the other part of this is Matheran has looked better every game. 15 points, then 19 points, then 27 points, right? If his minutes go up, can he continue to up that output against a new team? I'll be curious about that. I don't expect him to go above 27 points, but how can he look as he continues to ascend and figure out his new team and look a little better? Or does the rookie wall of, oh my gosh, I'm playing a fourth game and, I guess it's not that fast, but a fourth game in 10 days, that's unusual for the college level. Does that matter at this point? But in general, these two rookies are super fun. Matheran's gotten better every game. How does he look in this one? And the last thing I'll be watching relates to the first two segments of this show. Do we see any of these end of roster guys? Trevelyan Queen had that head injury. He's acclimating to a new team. Will he actually be able to play? I kind of doubt it. If he does, what does he show in his Pacers debut? But if not him, what do we see from Langston Galloway, James Johnson, and Davey Dasarbitas? Do any of them play? Do any of them do so well that they change this conversation? If any of them sneak into the rotation and the other two don't, that could be very telling as to who the team views as the leader for this spot, right? Again, none of them played on Wednesday. This could be their last chance. In fact, it probably is because the Pacers don't typically have, the same level of involvement of practice the day after games. This is probably their last chance to really show what they can do if they get in the game. How do they look? How do they handle that impression? Do they play well enough to change the calculus of this conversation? Or do the Pacers stick to what they've been probably sticking to the whole time? And I think it's possible those guys are done playing and the Pacers have already made their choice. But I guess we will officially find out either Friday right after the game or Saturday. And it's their last chance to prove it. Of course, like I said, next Monday, we'll be talking about the decisions they made as they finalize preseason. If any big news happens, we'll talk about it Monday. If not, we'll preview the season for those two guys. Tuesday, we'll wrap up preseason. I think I have a guest lined up for that, but TBD, so I won't say who. Next Wednesday, regular season preview time. Pacers Wizards that night. Pacers blog. Derek Kramer, the best in the biz, is going to join us, and we'll talk about his new 6 shirts. Go check out his Twitter page if you want to support him. And then Thursday, Adam Friedman, old co-host of the show, is back doing his favorite show of the year, overreacting to the Pacers' first game. Guests are coming. Fun content is coming. Pacers regular season right around the corner. We'll have it all for you here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Thank you guys a ton for listening today. If you think I missed anything in this roster battle discussion, hit me up on Twitter at TEastNBA or this podcast at Locked On Pacers. If not, thank you a ton for listening. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.